Greetings, everyone. The scenario of unifying Moldova and Romania as NATO's border approaches Putin's last military weak point. Ladies and gentlemen, Moldova has taken a decisive step to cut off Putin's last bridge to Europe. And now Russia has no way to prevent this because Moldova's move is too dangerous. For many long years, Putin has used the breakaway region of Transnistria as his most valuable card in southern Europe. It was a lever to keep Moldova within his sphere of influence, a barrier to prevent NATO's expansion, and a military base ready to shift the balance of power in the Black Sea whenever necessary. When Russia launched its campaign in Ukraine in 2022, part of the plan was to advance toward Odessa to establish a land corridor directly connecting to Transnistria. However, that calculation completely collapsed. The Russian army never reached Odessa, and Transnistria was left isolated, hanging in the void. Realizing that the Kremlin could no longer protect this card, Moldova launched a series of relentless attacks. On April 22, 2026, the Chisinau authorities declared 6 senior Russian commanders as persona non grata and immediately expelled them from the country. But this was only the final link in a silent offensive campaign that had lasted for many months. A complete break with the Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS, an economic blockade, and a rapid integration process with Romania were set in motion. To decipher the moves of Moldova and Romania, let's take a short journey on the map. Moldova is a small country sandwiched between Romania and Ukraine, located right in the heart of Europe. And within that small country, on the left bank of the Dniester River, there exists a ghostly land that has been under Russian control for more than 30 years, Transnistria. Here there are 1,500 Russian soldiers, 20,000 tons of Soviet-era ammunition, and 220,000 civilians holding Russian passports. This used to be Putin's last military stronghold in Europe, until Moldova decided to destroy this bridge. Let's start with the impacts of the latest move. The recent military containment move on April 22 will soon reveal its direct consequences on the ground, as a devastating blow to operational command capabilities. When the Soviet Union collapsed, remnants of the Army Corps remained here and were stationed under the guise of peacekeeping forces for more than 3 decades. With the recent expulsion order, the military command chain is now officially broken. 6 senior Russian officers now have no way to set foot on territory controlled by Moldova. All routes to Chisinau, the airport, and their international connections have been cut off. Geographically, Transnistria is nothing but a trap. To the west is Moldova, to the east is Ukraine, and both borders have been shut tight. These commanders are trapped in a narrow strip of land only 200 kilometers long. Meanwhile, a portion of the Russian-speaking population in the area is seeking a way out by applying for Moldovan passports. Public support for the separatist regime is seriously eroding. Youth migration is weakening the region's demographics. Russia is now caught in a dilemma, unable to withdraw troops, unable to send reinforcements, and unable to command effectively. Perhaps this is the first time in history that a major power has lost the ability to rescue its own soldiers. But the problem doesn't stop with the 6 commanders or the Russians living here. This move directly strikes at the supply chain, supporting all 1,500 Russian soldiers. Troop rotation is almost impossible. Ammunition and equipment supplies have been entirely cut off. In particular, 20,000 tons of explosives at Kobachna, the largest unsupervised weapons depot in Europe, are becoming an unpredictable security threat to the entire region due to improper maintenance. Moldova is rendering Russia's military presence ineffective, without firing a single shot. But diplomatic expulsion is only the first prong. The second prong is economic pressure. When Ukraine stopped transiting Russian gas in 2025, Transnistria's economy collapsed. Moldova turned this crisis into a golden opportunity. They implemented nationwide customs regulations, eliminated trade privileges, and began making the region completely dependent on Moldova's economy. The third prong is political pressure. The Moldovan parliament approved the withdrawal from the CIS on April 2nd. President Maia Sandu signed the decree on April 6th. CIS membership was once Russia's legal basis for justifying its peacekeeping rhetoric. Now that basis is being eliminated. The 5+2 negotiation format, which lasted 30 years, has also been declared dead. In fact, it was just a tool for Russia to freeze the status quo. Chisinau has refused to continue this game. Another aspect of Moldova's strategy to move away from Russia is strengthening its ties with Romania. And this convergence is no longer just empty words. It is progressing with concrete steps. President Sandu stated in January 2026 that if there were a referendum, she would vote in favor of unification with Romania. Prime Minister Munteanu went even further. In Bucharest in April, he stated that citizens on both sides of the Prut River realize we are very close to the moment of great unification. Unification now seems more realistic than ever. A survey in March showed that up to 44% of people agreed, including votes from the overseas community. This number could reach as high as 55 to 58%. While official policy still prioritizes joining the European Union, unification is increasingly discussed as an inevitable alternative. The two countries have essentially acted as a single entity. On April 23rd, the railway line connecting Prut 2 in Moldova to Felciu in Romania resumed operation after 17 years of interruption. This is more than a railway line. It's the physical reconnection of the two peoples. The energy networks are being more closely integrated. A significant share of Moldova's electricity and gas needs is now being met by Romania. Legal committees are working together to harmonize the legal system according to European standards. Regulations and standards are being rapidly aligned. Romania is currently Moldova's largest trading partner and energy supplier. Unification hasn't been formalized, but it's already happening in practice. The Romanian side, though cautious, has always expressed strong support. Mayor Nicolae Orzan believes that the time is not yet ripe, but Prime Minister Ciolacu affirms that he will vote in favor as a citizen. The current support rate for unification in Romania is 56%. When these numbers are combined, it's clear that unification is no longer just a nostalgic dream. Russia's response is very harsh. Foreign Minister Lavrov warned that unification would destroy the Moldovan state, calling it a provocation and an expansion of NATO. However, Russia's ability to prevent this is becoming extremely limited. The final institutional link was severed when Moldova left the CIS. Energy dependence has shifted entirely toward Romania. The military presence in Transnistria, Russia's last leverage, is being eroded through diplomatic expulsions. Moscow is losing Moldova and has almost no tools left to turn the situation around. Although the scenario of unification is still hypothetical, its geostrategic consequences are well worth analyzing right now. Because if that happens, the equation in Transnistria will change completely. If Moldova unifies with Romania, the Russian soldiers in Transnistria will no longer be standing on Moldovan soil. Instead, they will be stationed on the territory of a NATO and European Union member country. This fundamentally changes the nature of the situation. Currently, Russian soldiers in Transnistria are on the territory of a small neutral country with weak military capabilities. Once unified, these soldiers will be on NATO territory, and the rules of the game will change completely. Russia can threaten Moldova, but threatening Romania, a member of the NATO alliance, is a completely different story with an extremely high level of risk. And this risk is no longer just theoretical. Standing behind Romania is the collective defense commitment of 31 NATO member countries. Even though Article 5 of the NATO Charter may not be directly triggered, and NATO might classify the Transnistria issue as an unresolved dispute, any military provocation by Russia in this area would still be considered an attack on a NATO ally. This has created an extremely powerful deterrent. Romania's NATO membership and its strategic position in the Black Sea are completely changing the balance of power. Romania has now become a key country on NATO's southeastern flank, with the Aegis Ashore missile defense system at Devaselu, the Mihail Kogalniceanu Air Base, and the permanent presence of naval forces in the Black Sea. All of this creates a solid shield to counterbalance Russia's power. The unification of Moldova and Romania could mean that these modern military infrastructures would be extended all the way to the Moldovan border, further narrowing Russia's strategic depth on its western flank. In that context, the Odessa Triangle, the trilateral cooperation framework between Moldova, Romania, and Ukraine, established in 2022, has become more important than ever. These three countries are now working closely in security, energy, and cyber defense. The Trilateral Cyber Alliance, signed in February 2026, is creating a joint defense barrier against hybrid threats. If unification happens, the triangle will become just two countries, but their power projection will greatly increase. And at that point, 1,500 Russian soldiers in Transnistria will be left in a completely hopeless situation. They will be trapped on NATO territory without ammunition resupply, without reinforcements, and with no way out. Moscow's only option at that time would be to withdraw its troops through diplomatic negotiations. This would mean the complete collapse of the frozen conflict strategy that Russia has maintained for the past 30 years, while also creating a dangerous precedent for all similar conflict tools, such as those in South Ossetia or Abkhazia in Georgia. If Moldova resolves the Transnistria issue, the Kremlin's strategy of freezing and controlling the post-Soviet space will officially vanish into thin air. It is certain that all these developments are causing intense tremors inside the Kremlin, because the statement made by Russian Security Council Secretary Sergei Shoigu on April 21 was truly the voice of panic. Shoigu compared the situation in Transnistria to the Donbass region after 2014. He accused Moscow of imposing a blockade, restricting freedom of movement, and arbitrarily stripping people of their citizenship. He stated that there are more than 220,000 Russian citizens living in Transnistria, and their security is under serious threat. And then he uttered a key, ominous statement. Russia will take all necessary steps and use every available method to protect them if needed. These words were a deliberate choice in a familiar historical scenario. In 2014, Russia used rhetoric about the safety of Russian citizens right before annexing Crimea. The proxy war in Donbass also started for the same reason. First came threats about the fate of Russians, then came the deployment of volunteers and the transfer of weapons, and finally, actual occupation. Now, Shoigu is applying that exact pattern to Transnistria. Phrases like blockade, travel restrictions, and stripping of citizenship are being deliberately repeated to evoke the Donbass scenario. The Kremlin did not choose this language by accident. This is a signal for escalating the crisis. But is there enough real power behind that signal? That's the real question. When we analyze Putin's options regarding Transnistria, the picture looks quite bleak from the Kremlin's perspective. Military intervention is theoretically impossible. Diplomatic pressure is now ineffective, as Moldova is no longer in the CIS and Russia's institutional tools are exhausted. Economic pressure is also limited because Moldova's energy dependence has shifted toward Romania. And most importantly, unlike Iran, Russia does not have any direct military threat it can enforce against Moldova because there is a warring country lying between them. There is a huge difference between 2014 and 2026, and that is Russia's military intervention capability. Accessing this area by land is impossible. Ukraine is in the middle, and they are in a state of total war with Russia. In the first weeks of the war in 2022, Russia tried to establish a land corridor to Transnistria by advancing towards Odessa. This plan failed miserably. Russia never reached Odessa, and now the front lines are hundreds of kilometers away from Transnistria. Even if Ukraine doesn't achieve an absolute victory in the war, just preventing Russia from reaching Transnistria is more than enough. And to remove this barrier, Russia would need to make a rapid and massive advance on the southern front, a scenario that no military analyst dares to predict at this moment. Sending reinforcements by air would require overcoming Ukraine's dense air defense system. Ukraine's Patriot, NSRV, AMS, and IDT systems would turn such an operation into a suicide mission. Flying Russia's giant Il-76 transport planes through Ukrainian airspace is no different than sending an invitation to be shot down. Approaching by sea was ruled out from the start because Moldova has no coastline. Moreover, Russia's Black Sea Fleet has suffered heavy losses from Ukraine's unmanned underwater vehicles and Neptune missiles. Therefore, Russia can't even resupply its own soldiers. Launching a new military campaign is basically impossible. Ukraine is the constant in this equation. Russia would have to completely defeat Ukraine or control the entire Ukrainian airspace to reach Transnistria, and neither of those things is possible at the moment. The title of the analysis by Euromaidan Press summed up the situation. Shoigu made threats, but the available methods are extremely limited because Ukraine is standing in the way. This impotence also reveals the Kremlin's strategic dead end. Putin has used Transnistria for many years as a tool to pressure Europe as leverage against NATO expansion, to keep Moldova within his orbit, and to influence the balance of power in the Black Sea. But now this card is slipping out of his hands. The military presence in Transnistria, once a tool of pressure, has now become a burden. 1,500 soldiers without supplies, reinforcements, or direct commanders are no longer a symbol of Russia's strength, but rather proof of the country's weakness. The fact that Shoigu has to resort to rhetoric from the Donbass era is a sign that the Kremlin does not want to admit this weakness, but they also have no better alternative plan. Although military intervention seems impossible, that does not mean Russia will just stand by and do nothing. The Kremlin still has another set of tools to use. It's just that this set includes tanks and aircraft. Hybrid threats are the main weapon. Disinformation campaigns, information manipulation efforts aimed at undermining Moldova's process of joining the European Union, efforts to portray Maya Sandu's government as a puppet of the West, or cyber attacks targeting Moldova's infrastructure, power grid, and government systems. And the most dangerous are provocations inside Transnistria, false flag operations to incite ethnic tensions, or stage scenarios of attacks targeting Russian citizens. In the early days of the Ukraine war in 2022, Russia tested exactly these kinds of provocations in Transnistria, with allegations of attacks on the Ministry of Security in Tiraspol, allegations of drone attacks on the Kabachna ammunition depot, or sophisticated sabotage scenarios targeting radio towers. All of these were moves that were carefully staged. These scenarios served a purpose, with many paving the way for Russia's advance toward Odessa. However, when the military advance was halted, those provocations were no longer enough to convince international public opinion. They failed at that time, but the Kremlin still has no intention of putting away this old playbook. Now, every move by Moldova could push the Kremlin to decide to reopen those pages of scheming. A new focal point has emerged, Gagauzia. This small autonomous region in southern Moldova is known for its pro-Russian sentiment and could very likely be used by the Kremlin as a tool to create instability from within the country. The leaders of Gagauzia have established close ties with Moscow in the past. And as the Transnistria card gradually loses its power, the Kremlin may use Gagauzia as a new leverage tool. This is the new version of the frozen conflict strategy that Russia often uses. When they lose ground on one front, they immediately open up another. The Moldovan government is thoroughly analyzing and closely monitoring developments in Gagauzia. But Moldova is no longer alone in this battle of wits. The Odessa Triangle, the trilateral cooperation framework between Moldova, Romania, and Ukraine, is creating a solid shield against hybrid threats. The Trilateral Cyber Alliance, signed in February 2026 between the cybersecurity agencies of the three countries, provides for joint defense against the most sophisticated attacks. In addition, the Trilateral Business Chamber established in the EU in January 2026 is also promoting increasingly deep economic integration. As a member of NATO, Romania is actively sharing information, military intelligence, and strengthening Moldova's defense capabilities. Meanwhile, Ukraine is taking on the role of coordinating border security, as the entire eastern border of Transnistria is now under the strict control of Kyiv. Europe is also pouring significant financial resources to strengthen the resilience of state institutions in Moldova, while supporting the goal of becoming an official member by 2030. If Russia has hybrid attack tools, then Moldova now also possesses a hybrid shield of its own, and that shield is becoming stronger with each passing day. The response from the Moldovan Ministry of Foreign Affairs on April 22 was extremely calm, but also very firm. They affirmed that the rights of everyone in the region are fully protected and guaranteed, and the situation remains completely stable. This shows that Chisinau refuses to fall into the trap of escalating tensions, but also absolutely does not back down even an inch. In your opinion, will Putin agree to withdraw troops peacefully, or will he carry out a military move to break the deadlock in the Gagauzia autonomous region to destabilize Moldova? If Moldova and Romania officially unify, will this be the first domino that causes all other pro-Russian separatist regions, such as those in Georgia, to collapse at the same time?